Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Diane Knopf, the chair of the Jewish Community Center of the North Shore's Jewish Book Month Speaker Series, and we're thrilled tonight to be partnering with J Arts, the Jewish Arts Collaborative, and Vilna Shul Boston for what I know is going to be a really fun and entertaining evening. Just a little bit about who we are. The JCCNS welcomes everyone from across Boston's North Shore and offers enriching programs and services from preschool, fitness center, summer camps, cultural programs, travel, and much more. Although the JCC was forced to close last March due to the pandemic, it quickly pivoted to provide fabulous fitness classes, preschool enrichment, and adult programs virtually. And they continue to do so even now that the center has reopened, as illustrated by this wonderful Jewish Book Month speaker series. We're very grateful to all our sponsors who make this possible, and especially to cultural benefactors Sharon and Howard Rich. I also want to thank our Jewish Book Month committee and our fabulous JCC staff. This would not be possible without all your efforts. Before we begin tonight, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen anytime during the event, and Alan Zweibel will be answering your questions after his presentation. It's my great pleasure now to welcome Noah Schlesinger, a Vilna board member, who will introduce Alan Zweibel. Please enjoy.
Thank you so much, Diane. As Diane mentioned, my name is Noah Schlesinger. I'm a board member here at the Vilna. We'd like to thank our partners for this program, so Jewish Community Center of the North Shore and J Arts. We at the Vilna, we were built in 1919 by immigrants from Vilnius. We're the only Jewish historic landmark still remaining in downtown Boston. Our recent $4 million renovation honors the historic nature of the building while propelling the Vilna, in our view, into the 21st century, allowing us to serve our community in exciting, novel, and expanded ways. We look forward to hearing from today's speakers, myself included greatly, about their own endeavors to uncover the lost secrets of Lithuanian Jews. The Vilna congregation, which began in 1893, was a shul, a spiritual place of worship, but it was also the center for Jewish life and tangible support to these Jewish immigrants of Boston. And now, over 100 years later, we celebrated our centennial last year. You should think of us as a JCC or a 92nd Street Y in Beacon Hill, and a central hub of activity, all the while brimming with an amazing amount of history. We tonight are thrilled to welcome Alan Zweibel. We'll be welcoming him back in May with his good friends and writers Dave Barry and Adam Mansbach to talk about their book, A Field Guide to the Jewish People. If you enjoyed tonight, we very much hope you'll be able to join us again in a few months' time. So quickly, the way today will work, Alan will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to audience Q&A. As Diane mentioned, please do feel free to type in to your screens directly in the Q&A box, and we'll look to ask as many questions as possible. About Alan, he was an original SNL writer. He's won 5 Emmy and 2 Writers Guild of America awards for his work in television, which also includes its Garry Shandling show, which he co-created and produced, the David Letterman show. If you haven't watched his bits on David Letterman, I'd highly encourage you to. They are hilarious. And Curb Your Enthusiasm, last but not least. A frequent guest on all the late night talk shows, Alan's theatrical contributions include his collaboration with Billy Crystal on the Tony Award-winning play 700 Sundays, Martin Short's Broadway hit Fame Becomes Me, and the off-Broadway play Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of romantic comedy, which he adapted from his best-selling book. All told, Alan has written 11 books, including the 2006 Thurber Prize-winning novel, The Other Shulman, about a man from New Jersey who runs the New York City Marathon, the popular children's book, Our Tree Named Steve, and A Field Guide to the Jewish People that he wrote with Dave Barry and Adam Mansbach. His humor has appeared in such diverse publications as The New Yorker, Esquire, The Atlantic Monthly, the New York Times op-ed page, the Huffington Post, and Mad Magazine. In 2010, Alan was given an honorary PhD from the State University of New York, and because of the diversity of his body of work, in 2013, the Writers Guild of America presented him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Alan is currently preparing his play Bunny Bunny for a return to the New York stage. His cultural memoir titled Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier was recently published by Abrams Books, and a new movie he wrote with Billy Crystal called Here Today that stars Crystal and Tiffany Haddish will be released later this year. But the production that Alan is most proud of is the family he's co-produced, in his words, with his wife, Robin, their 3 children and 5 grandchildren. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Alan Zweibel.
Thank you, Noah. Wow, I'm really, really humbled by that beautiful, glorious introduction that I wrote. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be talking to you tonight. I'm here in New Jersey. We have this beautiful apartment, my wife Robin and I, right here on the Hudson River side of New Jersey. I can see Manhattan. I can see the Statue of Liberty, and up that way is the George Washington Bridge. So when I talk about different eras of my life, I may be pointing. That's only because I'm pointing. Okay, that's where they are. But this book I'm going to be talking about tonight is a cultural memoir called Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier. For years, I had been asked to write this kind of a book, and I understand why. I'm very lucky. I'm also very old that I have been able to span different generations of comedy, different sensibilities, beginning with the Catskill Mountains, becoming one of the original Saturday Night Live writers. Garry Shandling show is the first actual comedy made specifically for cable. My work on Broadway, my work in movies, but there's a reason that I wrote the book now, and I will get to it. There's a heartfelt reason. I didn't want to write a book that just said, oh, and then I wrote this, and then I wrote that. There is a sentimental reason why I wrote it at this point in my life, which I am going to share with you. But just a little bit about me. As Noah said, I'm a comedy writer. I write for Broadway, I write books, I write movies, I write TV shows, and I find it very ironic that this is what I do for a living, because initially, it wasn't even my idea to become a comedy writer. This was a decision that was made for me about 40 years ago by every law school in the United States. I had gone to the University of Buffalo for undergraduate school. I did pretty well, but you had to take the law boards, the LSATs, to get into law school. And back then they graded them from 200 to 800. If you can write your name, you got a 200. If you were Albert Einstein, you got an 800. If you were Alan Zweibel, you got a 390, which basically was vegetable mentality. So I remember going back home and told my Long Island Jewish parents that I got a 390 on the law boards. And about a week later, this is after they uncovered the mirrors, my dad gave me $1,000, which I then took and gave to a man named Stanley Kaplan. I can't hear you guys, so I don't know whether or not you're familiar with Stanley Kaplan, but for those of you who aren't, he's a man who owns all of these schools all over the country that teaches you how to take standardized tests. So I gave him $1,000, and for 6 months I studied really hard because I wanted to retake the law boards. And I had number 2 pencils, and I had the earphones, and I went over all the old tests, and I retook the law boards, and my score catapulted up to a 401, which I figured out that I would end up being around 90 before I got into English-speaking law school. What I did, it's a very scary time. I'm at a school, dental school, all sorts of grad schools. I moved back into my old bedroom, and I didn't know what my future would be. I started writing jokes for comedians who worked in the Catskill Mountains. I'm going to point. The Catskill Mountains are up that way, about 100 miles north up the Hudson River. And back in the 50s and the 60s, for those of you who may not remember or know, the Catskill Mountains was like the breeding ground for comedians. That's where there were 1,000 different hotels that had nightclubs. That's where comedians like Alan King and Buddy Hackett and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis and Toady Fields got their start. And it was there that they learned their craft. And then ultimately they got discovered and they went to California and they had got their own TV shows or their own Las Vegas acts. I graduated college in 1972 when the only guys who were left in the Catskill Mountains were the ones who weren't going to make it. Everyone who was going to become a star was already gone. And I ended up writing for every Mickey, Dickie, Freddie, Morty, and Lee that ever lived. These were opening acts, very nice men. And it was a kick at first. It was a kick writing jokes for them because my mom and dad would take us on holiday weekends. They'd put us into the station wagon. We'd drive up to the Catskills and we'd go to a hotel like the Concord or the Nevele or Grossingers. And as a little boy, I used to sneak into those nightclubs because I was too young and hear these comedians. And now I was writing for them. So it was a kick. I'm 21, they're 45. There was a sensibility difference, you know, but they were nice to me and they were very generous with their encouragement. They weren't that generous with their money. $7 a joke. That was the going rate. If you sold jokes to comedians back in 1972, you got $7 a joke. And some of them were real pains in the ass because I would borrow my parents' car on Long Island. I'd drive 100 miles, sit in the back of the nightclub, listen to my jokes, and invariably the comedian would come off and say, boy, that joke about paving the driveway really didn't work. And I'd say, gee, I heard laughs. And then we would bargain and I'd go home with $4, okay? This was slow and arduous. And do you want to hear a $7 joke? First joke I ever wrote that got $7 for a Catskill comedian named Morty Gunty calls my house and says to me, I'm 21, he's 45. And he says, you know, sperm banks are in the news. Can you write me a joke about a sperm bank? So I wrote, they have a new thing now called sperm banks, which is just like an ordinary bank, except here, after you make a deposit, you lose interest. $7. I am now a professional comedy writer, living at home with my parents. To supplement this great living I was making, I got a job in a delicatessen on Hillside Avenue in Queens. You name it, I sliced it for about 2 years. And I would write jokes on little bags and shove them into my pockets and would go back to my parents' house at night and type them up and catalog them. About 2 weeks after that, I get a phone call from another Catskill comedian. His name was Freddie Roman. And he says, hey, I heard you write great sperm bank jokes. And I'm going, well, how did I become this guy? He says, can you write me one? I said, sure. So they were starting to freeze sperm. So I looked into the future and I said, you know, this could be a problem down the line. I said, because it's hard enough telling a kid he's been adopted. How do you tell him he's been defrosted? Okay, now I'm up to $14. All my friends are in med school. I'm living at home. I'm working at a deli. And it was difficult. These guys, our sensibilities were different. I wanted to, you know, my generation was the baby boomers. We were the generation that was the sons and daughters of those guys. They were talking about carpools and crabgrass, and I wanted to talk about Watergate and Woodstock and Nixon. And I'm looking around, I'm going, I don't know if I can do this. And they're really funny. These guys were really funny. I just couldn't capture their sensibility. They would tell fat jokes. They would tell jokes about a car mechanic telling a driver, listen, I couldn't fix your brake, so I made your horn louder. Okay, I laughed at those jokes, but it's not what I wrote. It wasn't my experience. And I continue to do that, write jokes for them. On the strength of the sperm bank jokes, my price went to $10, then $12. The most I ever got for one joke, I remember 18. I got high for a joke about a new porno movie that was coming out where the entire cast were Hasidic Jews, which was really unusual, especially the orgy scene, because the men were on one side of the room and the women were on the other. There was like a feeding frenzy for that. And I'm going, what am I going to do? You see, the problem was these jokes were self-contained. There was a beginning, a middle, and hopefully a laugh. I knew I wanted to write scripts someday. None of these guys had defined personalities. They were interchangeable. They all looked the same in their tuxedos. They shared the same false teeth, I think. And if one guy didn't do the joke, another guy would do it. There was nothing specific about them. It wasn't until years later when I started writing for guys, let's say, Rodney Dangerfield, where he had that thing, I don't get no respect. Well, then that was easier to write for a character like that. It was easy for me to have Rodney say, I never got any respect. Even as an infant, my mother wouldn't breastfeed me. She said she liked me as a friend. That was a lot easier to do than the jokes for these other guys. I'm dying a miserable death. I'm working in a deli. I'm living at home. I'm making next to nothing writing for these Borscht Belt guys. And then I looked around and I said, gee, where's the new Catskills? Where's the new breeding ground? Where are the younger comics coming from? This is 1974. And in New York, there were two clubs. One was called the Improvisation. The other one was called Catch a Rising Star. And they were showcases. And this is where young comedians, this is people like David Steinberg and Lily Tomlin and my good friend Larry David, they were starting in places like this. Robert Klein came in all the time and tried out new material before he flew out to the West Coast to do the Tonight Show. These guys were a little bit older than me, but at least it was my sensibility. So here was my plan. I took all the jokes those old guys wouldn't buy from me, and I made it into a stand-up act for myself. The plan was to go on stage, tell the jokes with the hopes that a manager or an agent would come in, like the material, and want to represent me to become a TV writer, which is what I wanted to be at the time. The first week that I'm there at the club, I meet another guy who's just starting out. His name is Billy Crystal. He was married. He lived 4 towns over from where I lived with my parents on Long Island. I lived in Woodmere. He lived 4 towns over in Long Beach. We became quick friends, and he would pick me up every night in his little blue Volkswagen. We would drive into the city. We would tell our jokes. And on the way home, we would listen to the cassettes and critique each other. Say, oh, that joke worked good. And maybe if you said that joke this way, and we would help each other. And that's a relationship, I'm going to jump a little forward, that has been one of the most, when I say my life helping funny people be funnier, it's very much about my collaborations, how very lucky I've been to work with people that I wrote with and wrote for. And Billy was one of them. We started out, like I said, going to the clubs together. Years later, as Noah said in the introduction, we wrote a Tony Award-winning play called 700 Sundays. And most recently, he and I wrote a movie called Here Today that stars him and Tiffany Haddish that will come out. Well, we're going to find out very soon when it's going to come out. It should have come out already, but COVID, closed up all of the movie houses. But he's been Uncle Billy to my kids, and it's Satyrs with he and his family. So that's a relationship that's sustained. And so one night I'm on stage at Catch a Rising Star. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm having the hardest time in the world making these 6 drunks from Des Moines laugh. I get off the stage, I go to the bar, and I'm hanging my head, and I'm waiting for Billy to be done so he can drive me home. when a guy comes in, sits next to me, and basically tells me that I'm the worst comedian he ever saw in his life. And I thanked him because I really needed to hear that to really help my ego. He said, but your material's not bad. Did you write it? And I said, yeah. He said, can I see more of it? And I didn't even ask who it was. At this point, I would have shown it to like a gardener. It ends up, this is Lorne Michaels. This is April of 1975, and he's going all over New York City to do that was going to premiere in the fall called Saturday Night Live. I go back to my parents' house on Long Island. I stay up at my mom and dad's kitchen table. I stay up 2 days straight, and I type up what I believed were 1,100 of my best jokes. 2 days straight typing. And back then the typewriters had the keys that went like this, and then they became ensnarled, and then you had to undo it, and you got all the ink, and you were a mess, okay? 2 days of that. I then had to go back to New York for my meeting with Lorne, and I knew that this could be a big thing. I'd never had an interview before, let alone for a TV show, and I was really nervous, to the point where I didn't even know what to wear. I'm thinking to myself, okay, young hip producer, young hip show. Oh no, I'll dress young, I'll dress hip. I put on my father's maroon polyester leisure suit. I looked like a big blood clot sitting on the Long Island Railroad going into the city for my meeting with Lorne. And like I said, I was nervous. I went to his hotel. The meeting was at 2, but I didn't want to be late. So I got there like at 7 in the morning, and I'm in the lobby. And this is April of 75. There's no cell phones. You know, I go to a payphone and I call Billy Crystal. Billy had been spending time with Lorne. There was talk that Billy may be in this new show. They had dinner together. They went for walks. They spoke comedy. And I said, listen, I have a meeting with this guy, Lorne. Can you tell me a little bit about him to give me a leg up in this meeting? So he said, well, he used to work with Woody Allen. He's produced some Monty Python specials. Oh, and he hates mimes. Lorne hates mimes. I said, okay, got it. I go upstairs at 2 o'clock. I sit on the edge of the bed in his hotel. He pulls up a chair and I give him this tome of 1,100 jokes. He takes it, he opens it, he reads the first joke, then he closes the book. I'm up for 2 days straight, typing 1,100 jokes. He read one. And to show you how long ago this was from the reference points in the jokes, I had written a joke saying that the post office was about to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States. It's a 10-cent stamp. If you want to lick it, it's a quarter, okay? And he said, good. He said, very, very good. He said, how much money do you need to live on? So I said, well, I'm making $2.75 an hour at the delicatessen. Match it. And he said, well, tell me a little bit more about yourself, which I took to mean that before he committed to that kind of cash, he wanted to know what he was buying. So I remembered my call with Billy and I said, well, Woody Allen's my idol. I love Monty Python, but if there's one fucking mime on this show, I am out of here. And he gave me a job. That was the greatest, biggest day of my life. I'm 25 years old. 3 days later, we get the call that I'm going to be a writer on this new show. And here's the beauty of the whole thing. This is why I'm the luckiest guy in the world. My dad manufactured jewelry. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the geography of New York, but his place was on 52nd between 5th and Madison. And I would run errands for him, you know, after school or weekends. And no matter where the errand went or came back from, I made sure that I went by way of Rockefeller Center to and went through what was then called the RCA building. It's now the Comcast building. because upstairs, Johnny Carson was doing the Tonight Show. In the mid-60s, there was a show called That Was the Week That Was, which was a comedy news program. There were people upstairs doing what I wanted to do someday. And here it was, July 7th, 1975, maybe 10 years later, I'm reporting to that same building for my first day as a professional TV comedy writer. Really nervous. I go upstairs. Lorne Michaels' office is on the 17th floor, and we're going to have a first meeting about this new show. And I look around the room, just all the writers and the actors, and I see John Belushi and all improv players. See, back then, which is where Lorraine Newman was from, which is an LA improv group. And on their feet, they're creating characters and creating scenes and playing off of each other. Don't forget, I was a Jewish gag writer for, Borscht Belt guys who had cummerbunds, okay? There's no way that I was able to be in the same room, I thought, with these people. And I didn't want to be exposed as a fraud. I got really scared. I looked in the corner of Lorne's office, and there was a big potted plant. I went behind the plant, and I squatted down and hid. Biggest day of my life. First day as a TV comedy writer. First meeting, I'm squatting behind the plant. The meeting starts when all of a sudden from the other side of the plant, I hear a girl's voice saying, "Can you help me be a parakeet?" I parted the leaves and I look out and it's Gilda. I said, "What?" She said, "I think it'd be really funny if I scrunched up my face and stood on a perch and, acted like a parakeet. But I need a writer to help me figure out what the parakeet should say. Are you a good parakeet writer?" I had no idea what she was talking about, but at least somebody was talking to me. So I said, "I'm a great parakeet writer. I'm a great, great parakeet writer." And she said, "Good, really good." She says, "Why are you squatting behind that plant? You nervous?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a little nervous." She said, "Your first TV show, Alan?" I said, "Yeah." "How do you know my name is Alan?" She said, "You're the only one wearing a name tag." I said, she said, "Listen, is there any room behind that plant?" I said, "Yeah, a little bit." "Why?" She says, "Well, this is my first TV show too, and I'm also nervous. Can I come back there?" So I scooched over. Gilda came around and she squatted. And this is how I met my buddy Gilda Radner, squatting behind the plant during this meeting. We got to know each other. We made each other laugh. We even had our first fight squatting behind that plant. At one point, she says, "Do you want some gum?" And I said, "Sure." And she hands me a pocketbook the size of my high school. And she says, "Just go in and help yourself to some gum." I said, "It's in there." And she says, "Yeah, just open the zipper, reach inside and take out gum." I said, "I can't do that." She said, you said you wanted gum. Reach inside, pull out any gum you want." I said, "I can't do that." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm a boy and you're a girl, and there may be some things inside of that pocketbook that will eventually end up inside of you." I said, "I'm a writer with a very vivid imagination. So yes, I do want some gum, but can you please serve it to me?" She said, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" I said, "A little." She says, "No, you're like a major Jew." And we started having this tug of war with the pocketbook. And then all of a sudden, Lorne Michaels goes, "Where's Alan?" "Alan, I saw him before." Gilda goes, "Hey, she wants to hear your ideas for sketches. Do you have any?" I said, "Yeah, but I don't like talking in front of people and I think they stink." And she says, "Don't worry, I'll take over." She stands up from behind the potted plant, stands in front, addresses the room, indicates me behind the plant and says, "Zweibel's got this great idea where I play a parakeet." She attributed her idea to me. She said, "He's the funniest guy in the world, and we're going to be writing partners and platonic friends forever." Now, let's discuss this. Writing partners, I was thrilled about. We wrote a lot of terrific things together. I wrote for everybody on the show. I wrote the Samurais for John Belushi. I did a ton of Weekend Update. but I primarily, more so than any one writer, once again, my life making funny people funnier, I wrote with Gilda. She was my main writing partner, and we did some fun things together. Some of the memorable things we created, there was a character called Emily Latella, who was a little hard of hearing. She was based on a nanny that Gilda had growing up, who came on Weekend Update and gave an editorial reply to an editorial that she misheard the week before. So she would come on and rant and rave and rail about saving Soviet jewelry, okay? Or making Puerto Rico a state instead of a state. Presidential erections. I think the lowest we got once was saving endangered feces, okay? And she would be corrected, and then she would say, never mind. And the character worked and was a hit. I think the biggest hit that we had together was another character called Rosanna Dana, which we both created and became very, very popular. Every week she read a letter from a guy named Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey. He was my brother-in-law. I wrote a letter in his name. And this became its own little industry within the show. So we had a very fruitful relationship writing-wise. Back to the platonic thing. It's always been my feeling, especially at that age, that there's usually one person in a platonic relationship who doesn't want it to be platonic. But you go, okay, if these are the rules, I'll live by them, but one day you'll open your eyes and you'll behold the glory that's in front of you. This lasted for 14 years. I chased her ass. It was platonic, and we had this wonderful relationship, and we started this brand new show called Saturday Night Live. This was October of 1975. We were all in our early or mid-20s. Lorne Michaels had one rule. He said, let's just make each other laugh. And if we do that, we'll put it on television. He insisted that there was a generation, a baby boomer generation, who was the sons and daughters of those Catskill guys I used to write for, who weren't being spoken to on TV, comedically. He said, let's make each other laugh. We'll put it on TV. I think those other people will laugh. And we did it. We went on to live television. You know, these days I write books, I write plays, I write movies, and if I'm lucky, they see the light of day 2 years from now. On Saturday Night Live, you can write something on Monday and it's on television on Saturday. You can write something on Saturday and it will be on that night. There's a dress rehearsal at 7:30. An audience comes in, you put on a show for them. Everybody's in wardrobe and the bands play. It's a show. Then that audience leaves. You go up to Lorne's office, you decide which sketches are going to be in the show, which ones aren't going to be. If you have a sketch that's going to be in the show, you tweak it, you try to make it funnier, you edit it down, you go to cue cards, you give them the changes. And I'd look at my watch, and if I had time, I'd go up to my office and I'd watch the 11 o'clock news. There was no 24-hour news programs back then, 11 o'clock news. And if something struck me as funny, I'd write a joke and it would be on Weekend Update a half hour later. I was with the show 5 years. And there were 2 shows that they did. They were on the air live. I was under the Weekend Update desk writing jokes and handing it up to them. It was exciting. It's a high wire act. If your joke works, you feel like the greatest, it's the greatest feeling in the world. And if your sketch doesn't work, you feel really lousy, but you have next week's show to redeem yourself. I'll give you an example of live TV a little bit. Gilda and I would write, let's say, Rosanna Dana on Friday night. Always left Friday night was the last thing, Weekend Update. We'd go to a restaurant with pens and legal pads. And there was in New York, there was a restaurant not too far from 30 Rock, a Japanese restaurant that was in the lobby of a hotel. So it stayed open until 4 a.m. We went there to write, probably a Rosanna Dana for the next night's show. We pass a newsstand, and on the sidewalk in front of it is a bale, of tomorrow's newspapers, right? and I look at the headline. It was probably the Post or the Daily News. And the headline was, Mr. Ed dies. Okay, you can tell this was a very big news day when the headline is the talking horse from TV is dead. I go and find a payphone. It's 2 a.m. I call Lorne Michaels and I said, listen, it's Zweibel. I got some bad news for you. What? I said, Mr. Ed died. He said, Alan, it's 2 a.m. There better be more to this phone call than this. I said, well, what about on the show tonight if we interview Mrs. Ed, the grieving widow? So he says, you find a horse and we'll do it. So now it's 2:15 a.m. and I'm a Jew in New York looking for a horse. Pick up a phone. I called the guy in charge of props, a Gentile. And I said, listen, it's Zweibel. I need a horse for the show tonight. And he goes, what kind? What a horse? What kind? 4 legs, a tail, teeth, a regulation horse. He goes, Alan, there's Clydesdales, there's Palominos, there's Pintos, there's Mustangs. What kind of horse do you want? So I'm thinking and I'm going, all right, picture Mr. Ed. Who would he choose for a bride? Get me that horse. I go home, I go to sleep, I wake up, I brush my teeth, I get dressed, I go to the studio, and there's a horse. So Bill Murray is now the anchor person for Weekend Update. And in dress rehearsal, I write a script where he's interviewing Mrs. Ed on her way home from the funeral. And it was really adorable. We put a black hat and a veil on the horse. And Gilda was to play the voice of Mrs. Ed. She would go into Don Pardo's booth. He was the announcer. Bill would ask a question and Gilda would answer it as the horse. And how they do it is they put molasses on the horse's mouth. So as the horse tries to lick it off, you shoot the camera that way and Gilda would talk and it looks like the horse is talking. During dress rehearsal, Bill asked the horse, did he suffer much? And he says, no, he went quietly. We go, okay, this could work. It seemed fine. I don't know what happened, but between dress rehearsal and when the horse saw the red light on the camera and realized he was on live TV, he flipped out. At one point, the horse starts running in circles. We don't have dialogue for this. Gilda has to ad lib and goes, oh, I'm so upset. I'm chasing my tail, Bill. And at one point, the horse breaks rank, leaves the studio, runs down the hallway of NBC. Lorne says to a cameraman, follow that horse. And Gilda says, oh, I'm so upset. I'm going to throw myself out a window, Bill. And that was live television. You couldn't pull it back. If it was taped, you can do it over. You can delete it. You can edit it. It's out there. It's out there. And that was the fun of live TV. You got to understand it sounds very tame right now, given that, back then there was no cable, there was no HBO or Showtime, let alone there was no Fox, no streaming like Netflix, ABC, NBC, CBS, that was television. I can give you a very quick anecdote about the censors. There was a censor that we have, her name was Jane Crowley. She was a heavy-set woman, ex-nun, dress shields, you know who I'm talking about. And her job was to sit in the control room during dress rehearsal and go over every joke, because that's the last chance that she had to censor us, because you go on the air live and it's out there. There's no pulling it back. I'm producing the Weekend Update segment of the show at this point. I guess it's around the 3rd year of the show. Michael O'Donoghue is a great writer, a senior writer on the show. He was one of the architects of SNL. Prior to that, he had founded the National Lampoon, a very, very special mind. And he called me up. He says, Alan, what if Weekend Update this week is brought to you by a product that we make up? I said, go for it. So this particular week, he had Don Pardo, the announcer, announce, and now Weekend Update brought to you by Pussy Whip, the dessert topping for cats. Well, it worked great. Everybody loved it. They loved it so much that I wanted to do one. So for the following week's show, I put into dress rehearsal Don Pardo saying, and now Weekend Update brought to you by Blue Balls, BLEU, Bleu Balls, the cheese snack from France. Everybody loved it except one person. The door to the control room opens. This 300-pound woman comes waddling up to me, Jane Crowley, and she says, Alan, you can't do that when we go on the air. I said, you can't do what? She says, you can't say blue balls. I said, why? She says, because it has to do with the male genitalia. I said, Jane, last week, you let us say pussy whip, which is clearly the female genitalia. And now this week, what kind of sexist organization are you running here? She says, give me a second. She goes into the control room, picks up the phone, calls God, I guess, comes out about 10 minutes later, finds me in the studio and says, Alan, I gave it some thought, and I've come to the conclusion that because I gave you pussy whip last week, I will be more than happy to give you blue balls this week. And I said, Jane, you know, that's not necessary. Just let us say it on TV and we'll call it even. And I stayed with the show for 5 years. I left in 1980. Everybody scattered. I got married to Robin, who I met on the show. And I started living, I decided to stay in New York. I always thought that there was something cool about being a New York writer. Nora Ephron lived here. Herb Gardner lived here. Woody Allen lived here. You know, Joseph Heller. All my idols lived in New York. I wanted to be that kind of writer. And I started living the life of a sitcom. It started with The Wedding. Robin and I made the mistake of thinking that Jews from Long Island and Jews from New Jersey were the same species. They're not. They have different rules, who pays for what at the wedding, and our parents never discussed it. They just assumed that their own rules applied. So at our wedding, we had no flowers and 2 bands. Okay, that's how our married life started. And I lived in New York. I wrote a book. I wrote my first play. And then I got a phone call in 1986 from my manager, a very, very powerful manager named Bernie Brillstein, who managed Lorne Michaels and Gilda and John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, the Muppets. He asked me if I knew who Garry Shandling was. And I had seen him on the Letterman show, thought he was funny. He says, well, they're doing a special that's in trouble. Can you come out here and see if you can help? And I flew out to LA, helped with the special, and I became friends with Garry Shandling. And for me, it was like lightning striking twice. The first time with Gilda. Here was a guy that we made each other laugh. We looked at the world the same way. And it's interesting, when you write with other people, and I've been very lucky to have collaborators like Gilda Radner and Garry Shandling. I've been writing a lot with Dave Barry lately, Martin Short, okay, Larry David. There's an interesting thing that happens is Billy Crystal, of course. You think alike. That just like friends, that's what draws you together. You have the same sense of humor, but when you write together, there's about 10-15% difference in your sensibilities. So the product that you come up with is something that neither one of you could have done alone. That's what you bring to the collaboration. And I had this with Garry Shandling, and we produced 72 shows of a series called It's Garry Shandling Show. And that brought me out to LA, and I did a pilot. And I had lost touch with Gilda. You know, she moved out to LA. She married Gene Wilder, and the 3-hour difference started becoming a factor. There was no email back then. So we lost a little bit of touch. It was birthday cards, an occasional phone call. But when I was out there doing the pilot, I figured, okay, I can jumpstart my platonic friendship with Gilda. And I would call her and we would make dates. And she would always accept the date. And at the last minute, she would always break the date. This happened 3 or 4 times. I called Robin, who was back in Jersey. We had just built a house. We're now up to 2 children. And I said, I don't think Gilda wants to be my platonic friend anymore. She says, stay right there. Robin called Gilda, then Robin called me and said, call Gilda. I said, no, I hate her. See how mature I am. She says, call her now. I called her and she said, hi, Zweibel. I go, Gilda, what's going on? She says, well, I haven't been feeling well. I said, what's wrong? She says, well, I have Epstein-Barr virus. Do you know what that is? I said, yeah, that's like mono, right? And she says, I'm telling you, Zweibel, my head wants to do everything that I've always done, but my body just won't let me. I said, well, what did the doctors say? She says, well, the doctors say that it's definitely Epstein-Barr and it's got to run its course. And when are you going to be out here next? I said, well, if this pilot becomes a series, I'll be back out in 6 weeks, to hire a staff and start this show. She says, call me when you come back. I said, sure. I flew back to Jersey. 6 weeks later, went back to LA and I rented a house. I don't know how much you guys know about Los Angeles, but it's a touch status conscious out there. Your status is either helped or benefited by whose house you bought or whose house you're renting. I rented a house from Larry Fine from the Three Stooges. Okay. Larry was my landlord. There was a dent in the wall in the living room. I said, oh, Mo must have done that. This was like a landmark to me. And the big burly men are coming in this particular Saturday. They're moving the rented furniture into the house. When all of a sudden at the door, I hear Gilda, like the welcome wagon, saying, hi, Zweibel. And as a welcome housewarming present, she had a big potted plant. And she brought it in and we put it in the corner. And I looked at her, I said, you look beautiful, honey. How are you? She said, Zweibel, I just found out I don't have Epstein-Barr virus. I go, great, we can go to Laker games, we can go to the movies. She says, I have cancer. I said, what? And she said, I have ovarian cancer, Zweibel, and I need you to help me get through this part of my life. I said, what do I do? And she said, make me laugh. And that was my job in my friend's life when she got sick. I would call her every night. I would tell her jokes. Garry Shandling and I would do a show every week and send her the cassette like a Hallmark card. All she wanted to do was laugh. You go to her and Gene Wilder's house, and on the refrigerator was a picture of me and Robin and our kids, Martin Short and his wife and kids, Harold Ramis, his wife and kids. Only wanted to laugh and wanted to come on the show. And we were walking on the beach in Santa Monica one night, and she was nervous. She hadn't been on TV in 6 years, and she was afraid that the studio audience wouldn't recognize who she was when she came through the door. And just as I was getting ready to say to her, don't be stupid, she says, but you know something? I have to come on your show. My comedy is the only weapon I have against this fucker. And that's what she called her disease, this fucker. She said, Zweibel, can you help me make cancer funny? Just a sentence you never hear. The night of the show, there's an audience, there's 300 people. They don't know she's coming on. She's a surprise guest. Garry is doing a monologue. There's a knock at the door opens. The audience sees her, and I never heard an ovation like I did that night. It was thunderous. And when I went to edit the show, TV shows are usually shot by 4 cameras shooting the same scene from 4 different angles. And then you go into the editing room and you piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle, and you have a coherent show. And the shot that I wanted to use of her entrance, I noticed that the picture was jiggling just a little bit, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I remember the night we shot the show, the man who was operating that camera was crying. and his hands were shaking. If you should ever see that repeat on cable, on some streaming service that Gilda's on, look for it. It's not really big, it's subtle, but I kept it in there as a tribute to her. And she had a great time, and she got nominated for an Emmy for that appearance. And I had to make my platonic friend laugh. It was my role, even to the point where she started not feeling really, really bad. And I went to the Cedar Sinai to give blood. And I was on the gurney, and a nurse came up to me and handed me a pen and a pad. And I said, "What's this for?" She says, "Well, Gilda likes to know whose blood she's getting. Write her something nice. She's having a tough time." So I wrote, "Dear Gilda, I knew I'd get some fluid of mine into you one way or another," which I think pretty much summed up our relationship. And in the wake of ultimately passing, this is where, I know you guys are going to see a lot of writers, you have, and you're going to see more. This is where a writer will tell you that they're lucky. 3 years after she passed, Robin, my wife, said to me, "You should write a book about you and Gilda." I said, "No, I don't want to capitalize on that." She says, "The hell with that. Your best friend died. You haven't cried yet." My way of dealing with it was revisiting it, revisiting the relationship. I wanted to relive everything one more time. I go, "Where did we meet?" "Oh, yeah, behind the potted plant." And it went all the way through 14 years of this friendship and ended with the eulogy that I gave at her memorial. And this was the book. It was called Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of love story. And I made it into a play ultimately, and it looks like it may be coming to Broadway. And the reason that I'm telling you this, a writer is lucky. My way of dealing with the passing of a friend was to stick my pen in my heart and relive it all. If you look at this book, it's all dialogue. There's no paragraphs. I didn't want the formality of structure. I wanted the words to touch each other one more time. And I even illustrated it. And trust me, I can't draw, okay? That's a car, that's a building. I can't draw, but it made me feel close to Gilda again. It was a love letter, and catharsis was over. Now, let's go back to this, the way I started our talk. Writing Bunny Bunny was my way of dealing with Gilda's death. Garry, Shandling, and I, by the time we finished our show, we weren't talking. We had done 72 shows together. The show that he did, if you remember, he played himself, a comedian named Garry Shandling, who was single. By the third year of the show, we now had 3 children. I wanted to write about different things. I became the commissioner of our son Adam's Little League. So when Robin and I would go into a local restaurant, we would get booed by other parents because I rescheduled the rain out the same day as the Schwedelson's bar mitzvah, and the kid was supposed to pitch in, but now he's got to go to Schwedel. And so I wanted to write about that stuff. Garry and I were estranged. We had a home here in New Jersey where we used to come during the summers because we sent our kids up to camp up in the New England area, up in the Casco, Maine, and Harrison, Maine. And Robin saw in the paper that Garry was appearing at Atlantic City. She called him and she said, "Listen, I'm bringing Alan. I'm throwing you both into a room and you're not coming back out until you're friends again. You've been through too much." I went. We sort of made up. And in the years that ensued, we started getting closer and coming back closer together. He created Larry Sanders Show. I did a couple of movies. He had some famous basketball games at his house on Sunday where whoever was around came and played, whether it was Ben Stiller or David Duchovny and Judd Apatow and Frank, and whoever was around. Sarah Silverman played in that game. So Garry and I were getting closer and closer to becoming friends again. And I was happy about it because I wanted him in my life. And I was out in LA and I was working on that script that I told you about that stars Billy and Tiffany Haddish a few years ago. And I called Garry and we were trying to make plans for dinner. Maybe we can complete the friendship circle. and it didn't work out. I had to go back to New York on Monday. He wasn't available. So we made up that we were going to speak that Thursday night. He died Thursday morning. So Gilda is represented very nicely in here because of what we did and what part of my past she was, and Gilda to the kids. Garry, this helped complete the circle. There's 2 chapters devoted to him and the loss of a friend, and how lucky a writer is to be able to access feelings and to be able to re-examine. I did it with Billy Crystal when he was ready to do 700 Sundays about his family. It was one of the highlights of my career. I never met these people, but he trusted me with his family. 700 Sundays, for those people who don't know what that means, Billy's father had 2-3 jobs a week. Sunday was his day off. Sunday was the day that Billy spent with his dad. And his dad died suddenly when Billy was 15. So Billy calculated that he had roughly 700 Sundays with him. And that's what the show is about, him and his dad and his mom and extended family. Billy trusted me with his family. Now, I never met any of them, but I'm a Jew from Long Island and he's a Jew from Long Island. So it's not like I was running for Martians. I knew who these people were. I know how they spoke. So it was easy for me to have, him to talk about that his ancestors were Yiddish, who came from Europe and mostly spoke Yiddish, which is a combination of German and phlegm. It was easy for me to do that, okay? But just like Billy wanted to revisit his family, and in a strange way, I revisited old relatives of mine through his family, I have to tell you that this business that I've chosen, this comedy writing business, yeah, I make people laugh, but there's also, I don't know if you're blessed with a gift, okay? Or if you're, or you're cursed with a blessing. I honestly don't know, but I wake up 5:30 every morning to do my work. And some days if I'm really, really cooking, I'm still writing at 12 o'clock. And there are some days I'll wake up at 5:30 and by 7 o'clock in the morning, I'll go, I don't have it. I'm dry as a bone. And it's 7 o'clock in the morning and I have nothing to do with myself all day. So, I think we're going to throw it open to Q&A, but I just want to conclude my part of this saying that I landed on my feet. I'm very, very happy. I've got a wife. Next week is 41 years we're married. We have 3 children, 5 grandchildren. And I'm the luckiest guy in the world who got to do what he always wanted to do ever since he was a little boy. And I'm happy to have shared it in my life with you guys tonight.
Alan, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I knew you would be funny, but I think the sentimental piece of this really shows a very Jewish thing, which is, how and why we use so much humor to talk about the human and life experience. So this has been wonderful. So before I ask you some questions, I just want to say I'm Laura Mandel, Executive Director of J Arts, where we bring people together to explore and celebrate the diverse world of Jewish art and culture. So of course, it's only fitting that we're here tonight. And I will also admit shamelessly, I am constantly quoting Curb Your Enthusiasm, and my husband's mad that he's putting the kids to bed in the other room because he wants to be here with you. So I'm actually going to kick off the questions asking you about Curb Your Enthusiasm. Can you tell me about maybe a favorite moment in Curb?
Well, yeah. A favorite moment in Curb is when I was on it as an actor. Larry David's been my good pal since 1974. I met him pretty much when I met Billy at the clubs. Larry David is a genius. Larry David thinks differently than everybody else in the world. Comedians and comedy writers, we all carry little notebooks with us. And if we're all at a table, let's say in a restaurant, and somebody drops a tray, we'll all take it out and we'll write something and we'll put it back and continue the conversation. With Larry, nothing will happen, and he'll take out his book and he'll write something, and everybody else is going, what did I miss? What's going on? Okay. And it will be on Curb 6 months later. Larry David, on Curb Your Enthusiasm, that show is not scripted. I worked on it a couple of years, and like I said, I was an actor on it. It's improv, okay? There is no script. Larry will chart out the whole season, each character, what their arc is over the course of the 10 episodes, what the storylines will be. He'll break down each episode into an outline. So each outline will have a heading, and underneath each heading will be bullet points, okay? He will give that section of the outline to the actors when they get on stage and say whatever you want, but hit these bullet points because that's our plot. Okay, there was 3 scenes, and I think it was, if you want to see it, I think it was either season 8 or 9, okay, the first time he went through. And somebody told me last night the title of it was The Bisexual. Trust me, that had nothing to do with me. I think that was, if in fact that is the episode, Rosie O'Donnell was in that episode. I didn't have any scenes with her, and that plot was that right for her, okay? All Larry told me was, he says, okay, look, they were shooting here in New York. He said, your name is Duckstein. Okay, fine, I'm Duckstein. He says, you'll be seated in a Japanese restaurant. I, Larry, will be coming in to pick up an order. You will recognize me from LA and come over and suggest we lunch. That's the only thing he told me, okay? So he comes into the restaurant and he goes, hi, Duckstein. And you can tell by the way he greeted me that he hates Duckstein. Okay. I said, look at this. We're both here in New York. Isn't this something? Why don't we have lunch? He goes, Duckstein, we both live in LA and we don't have lunch. Why should we have lunch just because we're both in New York? I said, because we never have lunch in LA. He says, do you ever think we don't have lunch in LA because I don't like you? I said, Larry, you don't like me because you've got to get to meet me. So we're just ad-libbing all of this stuff. He says, I don't want to meet you. And I said, that's your problem. Your world is only like this. I said, it should be like this. Let me in. And he says, Duckstein, then he took my hands. He said, I want to make it more like this. And he didn't have lunch with me. And it was really funny. We shot it, oh God, ad-libbing maybe 6 or 7 times. Might have been about a half hour worth of footage that he then later took into the editing room and whittled it down to 2.5 minutes. There were 2 more scenes, Duckstein, me alone, in Central Park eating a pastrami sandwich because I had nobody to eat lunch with. I choked on the pastrami sandwich. I'm giving myself the Heimlich maneuver. And the last scene is me in the hospital and Larry feeling guilty, coming to visit me, feeling guilty because I wouldn't be in the hospital had he said yes to having lunch with me, okay? And a year later, I see it on TV, you know? So that's the way it's done. I can tell you about individual episodes, but by and large, they're gleaned little things from Larry's wife. He did that with Seinfeld, and he does that with Curb.
I love it. Okay, I have so many more questions, so I'm just going to go into a few others. Another show that I love is something that someone asked about. What do you think about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
You know, I get asked that a lot, and I don't like to be negative about, I can understand why it's a big hit. I get it totally. It's loosely based on the life of Joan Rivers when she started and all of that. I'm not a good person to ask because I know too much and I know what's not real about it. I know what's fabricated. And so I think I'm looking at it with the wrong eyes because a lot of people who I know and respect really like the show, and I'm happy for their success.
totally makes sense. There's a lot of controversy over the Jewish piece of it also. So I think you could say that equally from a Jewish perspective.
Well, you know something, we live in an interesting time, you know. How else are you supposed to portray Jewish people? You know, the politically correct culture, I can understand that there's offense taken about exaggeration. That I understand. You go, whoa, 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 pull back a little bit. I know you're Jewish, you don't have to, you know, you just didn't get off the boat from Haifa. You know, you don't have to do that part. But the PC culture is a little bit, very prohibitive. And I'm just, you know, when we were growing up, everybody made fun of everybody else, and then we went out for lunch. You know, now it's a little bit like a minefield out there, but I can understand why that show is on, you know, is under fire because of that.
Absolutely. Okay, so sticking with the Catskills for a minute, speaking to reality, who do you think was the funniest Catskills comic?
Oh man, you know, there were Catskill comedians that you never heard of. There was a comedian named Gene Balos. I don't suspect anybody remembers him. I was taken to the Friars Club for the first time. For people who don't know, the Friars Club is a show business fraternity here in New York. It's over 100 years old, and it was founded by Irving Berlin and George M. Cohan, and it was a show business club. Now it's not as much show business because when show business moved to LA, they needed to let in what they called non-professionals, you know, to keep it afloat, okay? But the first time I was taken to the Friars Club, they have a bar when you walk in, and that's where I would sell some of my $7 jokes. The comics would hang out over there. And the first time that I'm there, I'm taken by the comic who brought me there into the main dining room. And there's a comedian who I had never heard of at the time named Gene Balos. And if I showed you a picture of him, you go, oh yeah, I've seen him. He's dead now, but sad sack, droopy, beagle kind of eyes, you know. And the comic says, Gene, I want to introduce you to Alan Zweibel. He's a very funny writer. Balos looks at me, says, you're funny, huh? You know who's also funny? My dentist. And he opens his mouth and outpours 30 chiclets as if they're his teeth. Now, I am telling you, Laura, to this day, I don't know if he always walked around with a mouthful of chiclets waiting to be introduced, or he saw me coming and he put it, I don't know how that worked, okay? So there was another guy. Your audience probably has heard of Henny Youngman because he's more recent and he was on Ed Sullivan a lot. Henny Youngman was known as the king of the one-liners, okay? And he had a fiddle, and his big thing was like, take my wife, please, okay? And they do 1,000 wife jokes. The first week that I joined the Friars Club, see, I had left at Saturday Night Live. I didn't have an office anymore. And we started having children and I needed a place to go to write. So I joined the Friars Club. They had a room upstairs where there was a big screen TV and, you know, newspaper rack. And, you know, I used that as an office. The first week that I joined the Friars Club, okay, now you got a picture. It's on 55th Street between Madison and Park. I make a turn onto 55th Street. For some reason, there was nobody around at this particular point of day. Maybe it was a Saturday. The street was empty. This is an important part of this story. I start walking towards the Friars Club. Out from a door in front of me, maybe 100 feet, is this Henny Youngman, king of the one-liners. He doesn't know I'm there. He thinks he's alone. Laura, this is a very important part of this story. He thinks he's by himself. He crosses the street to go to the Friars Club. A pigeon flutters down, lands at his feet. He looks at the pigeon and he goes, any mail for me? He didn't know I was there. He was talking to a bird. Okay, so this was an ilk of comedian. Their instincts, and I tell that anecdote in this book. They were wired in a certain way just to be funny.
And apparently you have a thing with comedians and birds.
Yeah, isn't that something? Yeah.
That is something.
Yeah, we got to look into that also. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a thing there. Okay, I'm supposed to wrap us up because we promised everybody we'd be done around now, but I have to ask you this. So a couple months ago, I had the pleasure of listening to you in conversation with Judd Apatow.
Sure.
And what I think is so interesting is you talked at the beginning of this presentation about collaborations being so important to you. And it feels to me like with Judd and these comics of a younger generation, that you've not only collaborated, but you really become a mentor, it seems to me. And I'm curious to know, who have you worked with of the younger generation who you really are most excited about?
Well, that's a wonderful question. You know, I look around because I was very lucky to have mentors like Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks and Larry Gelbart. Robin, this is my wife, Robin. Robin,
Come say hi.
Robin, come say hi to the nice people. Okay, I had that generation, the Norman Lears. They were my mentors. Buck Henry. The younger generation, and you don't look at yourself as a mentor. I guess it's a modesty thing. So when I asked Judd to interview me at that conversation you saw, I was delighted. I met him when he was 16. I was on his radio show on Long Island. So I guess he puts me in that category. There are younger comedians and comic actors out there who are brilliant. There's a guy named John Mulaney, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's hosted at SNL a number of times. He's brilliant. There's another guy named Mike Birbiglia. I'm a huge fan of his. Go see Mike. Watch SNL. Look at Kate McKinnon. I mean, I've never seen any. She is good enough to have been in any cast in any era of that show. So I'm a fan of Cecily Strong. You know, there are people who all of a sudden you go, wow, I never looked at the world that way. Look what they're doing. You know what I mean? So it's fun to watch New Blood and to see what they're doing with the same things that you're looking at, but they're coming at it from a different angle, just like I did when I stopped writing for those Catskill guys.
Love that. And I love everyone you mentioned. Great list. All right, I want to ask you more
Great.
questions, but I have been told to wrap this up. So I am going to throw it back to Sarah. Thank you
Thanks
so
very
much,
much,
Alan.
Laura. This was wonderful. You were great.
This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks so much. Sarah Ewing from the JCC here. Just want to thank Alan so much for accepting our invitation through the Jewish Book Council to speak with our community, and thank Jewish Arts Collaborative and Vilna Shul for partnering with us on this event. Please check out and buy Alan's book, Laugh Lines. We're partnering with our local bookstore in Beverly called Copper Dog Books. If you go to our website, jccns.org, you can link directly to the site and buy his book. It would make a great holiday gift for yourself or for family. So thank you, Alan. I know it's strange doing this talk into the void without a laugh track, but you did a fabulous job.
Great. I had a great time, Sarah.
So
Thank
that
you.
everyone was laughing on the other end.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I had a great time. You've got a great group, and hopefully someday I can come up there and meet you all in person.
Someday in person, that would be lovely. Join us for the rest of our events. You can go to our website to check them out. Our next event is on Thursday. It's our signature Girls Night Out event with Iris Krasnow, author of Camp Girls. It should be a really fun event, 7 o'clock on Thursday. And I just want to thank everyone again for attending this event. Stay healthy, stay well, and we will see you hopefully soon. Take care.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you so much, Alan.
A pleasure.